Hey everyone, Andre here on a very special anniversary, being 20 years of the GameCube, at least in North America. That's right, it came out a little bit after Japan, but quite a bit earlier than Europe, and we're here to celebrate its 20th North American anniversary, being November 18th. And Tom and I believe, are the only ones old enough in this discussion to have been there. Right, Tom? Do you remember those days?
Yeah.
And
I was there. I was 6, but I was there.
All right, so okay, you actually do have some memory of it. That's right. So okay, were you just beginning gaming then? Was GameCube your first official Nintendo console then, Joey? Or
It was my first, home Nintendo console. I had a Game Boy Color, so that was technically my first one. But then I got a GameCube circa 2003. So yeah.
Very nice. All right, so we're here to discuss all of our memories of this, some of which I imagine will be a little bit different given our different, where we were in our lives then. And I think it'll just be fun. GameCube has been one of my favorite systems over the entire history of Nintendo, and there's a lot of things that are distinct about it still to this day. And so I figured we discuss its history, the highs, the lows, our favorite games, our least favorite games, perhaps, all kinds of things. Or who knows where this discussion will take us. But let's begin with where exactly we were. We already kind of touched on that a little bit here. But Tom, I know you and I, we were both at the first official E3 for the GameCube in 2001, where we got to see its official North American unveiling. It had been announced before then in Japan, about a year before its release, but we got to see it in person and play it in person at E3. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you remember from those days, or?
Well, I remember E3 being a lot more. There were a lot more games on the show floor. Like sometimes Nintendo now will just focus on 1 or 2 titles at times, and you'd have neat things, like you'd have the game in front and also, I believe, a theater in the back. I'm not sure if it was that year, but for most years in that era, it was like that. And, they showed the console. It was a big unveiling, but at the same time, they had PlayStation and even Xbox, coming out to worry about. So, yeah, it looked like it had a lot of potential at the time, though. Like Luigi's Mansion looked amazing, but at the same time, shortly after, some guys from Nintendo were like, guys, I heard there's only like 70 rooms in Luigi's Mansion. It's not that big. And hearing stuff like that was kind of still a bit concerning at the time.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't there that leak that the night before too, where was it that year or the following year where we saw Star Fox Adventures before Nintendo meant to show it off?
I think that might have been the year. I think it was there 2 years. And we also saw the banner for Pikmin, and we're like, what the heck is this? Because we peeked into the expo hall while they were setting up everything.
And we're like, is Pikmin related to Pokemon? Like, we had no idea what Pikmin was back then. It was so very confusing.
I thought Pikmin was like the name of it. I was just like, oh, they're saying Pac-Man funny. But that wasn't the case at all.
It was like an inkblot test. It's whatever you want to make of it. It was such a weird, it was a weird title. And then we saw it, and it looked as weird as it sounded, seeing it in motion. But yeah, those were very exciting times. Like, this was Nintendo's second 3D console, so they were able to refine what they'd learned on the 64 era. And for the first time ever, we didn't get a Mario game at launch either. They had a pretty wide slate of games. I think around 15 launch titles in total, and a lot of really good ones there. But no actual proper Mario title. The closest we had was Luigi's Mansion, which is a pretty bold decision for Nintendo, with the actual Mario title not coming until the following year in the form of Mario Sunshine, of course. So right away, everything about the GameCube felt a little bit different. It was a cube. It had a handle on it. It was purple. It didn't have Mario at launch. It had a weird controller, which I think is personally amazing, but it was a little weird for its time.
Weirder than the Nintendo 64 controller, like
the three-handed one. I know.
Yes.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. Like, in some ways it was more conventional, in other ways it was weirder in its own right, because it did do what the DualShock did with 2 control sticks, but one of them was super tiny. They had the kidney-shaped button surrounding a giant A button, and then they had these amazing, I think, analog shoulder buttons or triggers. But
digital click or whatever.
Digital click, that's right, which Nintendo hasn't used since, which is so sad to me.
Sad.
So Joey, did you get a GameCube? You said, did you get it a bit after launch then, or?
I did. It's so weird because when you're a kid, time goes by slower. So I felt like I had the GameCube for like ever, but it was like, because I got it in 2003, which was like 2 years after the system even came out. Well, at this point, it was April 2003 because that was my birthday, so it was like a year and a half, maybe.
Okay.
But and then I had it for like 3 years until I got a Wii. I mean, I still have the GameCube, of course, but I felt like I still had that system for a long time. It's just so weird being a kid because you're not all caught up in the zeitgeist of like the E3s or like the launch titles. You're kind of just there as it happens. You think, oh, that game looks cool, and then you browse it, and it's like I didn't really read any gaming magazines or even go on many gaming websites at the time, so it was kind of just like I went into stores and I thought, maybe I should play this, maybe I should pick this game up, It's interesting, really. And I also missed out on a lot of the great GameCube titles, at least like when they at least around the time they came out. Like I as a kid, you like movie-based licensed games, and that's a lot of what I played on the GameCube, I'm sorry to say.
Well, like, what was that SpongeBob game that was really
Battle
popular?
for Bikini Bottom, and
Yeah,
and that is amazing. I also played a lot of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I picked up the Incredibles game. Man, just so much on there.
Eric Flapjack Ashley in the chat, we are recording this live for our patrons, says, I was disappointed there was no Mario game at launch, held an unfair grudge against Luigi's Mansion for a long time because of it. Yeah, I can see that. Mario does have a cameo in Luigi's Mansion, at least. Like, you could consider it a cameo, if you will. But yeah, it was a weird launch. And I mean, really, everything about the GameCube was weird. And as Joey
Small
was saying,
disc.
yeah, so the small disc, right? The three
disc.
Yep, they can only hold 1.5 gigabytes. So some games that come on multiple discs, such as I think the Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 4 at the least. And yeah, I think that was done partially for copy for copy protection reasons, so people didn't just copy games, I believe, because there weren't any like tiny CDRs, as I think. But maybe they just want to make a tiny console too, Which, by the way, speaking of the hardware, Jonathan in the chat, another patron, had mentioned earlier that they wanted to talk about the biggest scam in the gaming industry, being that the GameCube, with its dimensions of 4.3 by 5.9 by 6.3, is not a cube. It's a rectangular prism.
I mean, Nintendo rectangular prism doesn't roll off the tongue as well as GameCube. Game rectangular prism.
Maybe
it's
Xbox.
a lot.
Go ahead.
It's a lot closer when you add in the Game Boy player below it, though.
That's right. Does your GameCube behind you have that right now?
It's in the other room, but I do have that, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That actually does become closer to a cube, which is funny. So you have to pay extra. You have to pay to get your proper cube there, Jonathan, I'm sorry to say. So what do we think about the what do we think about the GameCube when it came out, and throughout its runtime, if you want to call it that? Were you happy with it during those years, or is it something you look back more fondly on now than you did at the moment? But I do remember, I know time was kind of, especially a longer day for you than Joey, but there were actual legitimate gaps in the software, particularly because despite Nintendo's best efforts, they still weren't able to court third parties in the way that they did before on Super NES and NES, or how they are now on Switch. Although I had 600 games, that paled in comparison to the PlayStation 2, and I think possibly even the Xbox. In fact, probably very likely the Xbox. So yeah, do you remember back then, Joey, for you? What do you remember thinking of the platform?
I mean, to me, it was just a game console where I played my games, and that was like...
well, it was a GameCube.
It was a GameCube.
Yep.
It was a cube that played games.
Yep.
Yeah, I just remember, I don't really remember any, gaps or anything. I also wasn't able to buy games as often back then, because, I was a broke 10-year-old,
right.
Not even 10-year-old, younger than that. That was the most of the games that I got were, of course, the movie licensed games that I felt like picking up when I had some cash left over. That was when I started saving for games and whatnot. So that's why I didn't buy games that often.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents didn't really buy me games that often either, unless it was my birthday or it was Christmas time. I did play a lot of Sonic games on there, and I do remember Sonic being this was kind of the first time Sonic was on a non-Sega platform, because the Dreamcast just flopped miserably.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Adventure 1, but in that order too, so it was it's 2 before 1, okay. Only on GameCube. They were GameCube exclusives for a while, so that's how I was really introduced to Sonic, were those games.
Wow.
I played the Genesis ones before, but I picked them up on GameCube. And even the Mega Collection was on there too, so yeah, that was kind of my Sonic machine. It was kind of interesting seeing I didn't really gather back then that Sega fans must feel so weird playing Sonic on a Nintendo platform.
It was weird for us Nintendo fans, let me tell you, seeing Sonic on Nintendo, because that was the first time that happened, and that was bizarre. Did you feel the same way too, Tom? Or
Yeah, it took a while to get used to. It's like, oh, Sega, like it shut down so quickly and shifted gears, and it's like, what's going on? And it's like, oh, you can play Sonic on GameCube now. It's like, oh, okay. Well, these were great Dreamcast games. I mean, I guess it makes sense. It was just a shame that Dreamcast ended so quickly.
it is interesting looking back how, yeah, Nintendo benefited from, with Sega going third party, they benefited from the Sonic alliance, I suppose, getting Sonic on their platform, but then everything else went to Xbox. Like, they got Crazy Taxi 3, they got Jet Set Radio, or Jet Set Radio Future, and I think there was something else in there, Panzer Dragoon, I believe, right, was an Xbox game. So it was interesting how Sega kind of split up their properties, probably smartly so, although I would have loved to have those on GameCube at that time. But yeah, GameCube, for as limited, for as small as its library may have been compared to the PlayStation 2, it still had like a wide variety of games, even among Nintendo's own first-party ones. But before we get too deep into that, Tom, did you pick up a GameCube at launch? Do you remember?
I did get it at launch. Yeah.
So did you do the midnight experience then? Did you wait? Did you line up early or late?
I think I just had to come in that day and pick it up. I don't know if they did a midnight launch here just yet, but I believe with it, I ended up getting Tony Hawk, and I'm thinking Rogue Squadron over Luigi's Mansion. I'm not sure if I had Luigi's Mansion at launch. I think I had those two at first, just because I knew they would last longer in terms of gameplay value. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it did cost a lot, because you had to buy that, and with the bundle at EB, which is, GameStop, basically you had to get a memory card too and stuff.
That's right.
And the controller, like, it was over $600, which now it's like, oh, $600, that's great for a console, but back then for a console it was a lot.
Well, keep in mind too, that was also worth more back then. Thanks, inflation. So
yeah,
that is a good point. But yeah, they had quite a few good launch, or they had quite a few launch titles at launch. I already touched on some of them, but yeah, there was like Luigi's Mansion, Super Monkey Ball, Wave Race, and then Rogue Leader. All four of those games I picked up at launch. But there was also All Star Baseball 2002, Batman Vengeance. Oh, I forgot Crazy Taxi actually was on the GameCube. Oh yeah, totally. That's right.
I have a copy right there.
Well, there we go. The third one, the sequel though, came to Xbox exclusively.
Right.
Yeah, there were some other games. Tony Hawk was there, NHL, Madden, a couple football games. Oh, Disney's Tarzan, talk about your licensed games. Started on day one there. Dave Mirra, Freestyle BMX 2, so yeah, lots of games. So for me, though, I did the proper midnight, actually, kind of. I did the overnight experience, Tom, where I was an idiot, didn't pre-order the system, and I decided to stand outside the store that didn't even open at midnight. So I had to wait out on the cold with my good friend Skylar, who started GameXplain with me all those years ago, and not quite then, but a few years later. And yeah, we waited overnight at Target for them to open, I think, at 8 a.m., and it was freaking cold. Wow. It was in Seattle, and we could see our breath. I was freezing out there. We were the first in line, by the way. We were the first two in line, and I remember being instantly disappointed because one of the Target employees came out and was like, wow, there were way more people waiting for the Xbox at this time. Like, really? Because that had launched, I think, 3 days earlier, because we just had the 20th anniversary here, too, for that. And, so we wait overnight. Luckily, the line did grow, starting around probably, I think, 10 p.m. maybe, and then it continued to grow overnight, mostly by the morning. There was maybe 15, 20 people in line, I'd say. And yeah, me and my friend Skylar were the first ones to get the GameCube. I remember racing home, plopped it in, connected all together, I put Luigi's Mansion, I think, probably in first. I'm only assuming, I don't know for sure. And then I remember playing through that game and then trying another game and then a third game. I'm like, I'm not having any fun. I was so exhausted, I couldn't even appreciate what I just waited for. So I went to bed, woke up a few hours later, probably around like 3 p.m., and then finally was able to enjoy my spoils. So, yeah. But yeah, it was a kind of a different time because, like, even though the internet was around then, we had websites like IGN and stuff. You still didn't have like the continuous exposure to games these days. We can just watch the entire game, during its launch or after, even before, in some cases. It was very different. So everything kind of felt pretty new then, like I had heard Luigi's Mansion was short, but I didn't know what that actually entailed. I knew you had to vacuum, I knew you would suck things up. It all felt very new and fresh at that time, especially with seeing the awesome, like, the Luigi's Mansion looked amazing. Rogue Leader looked amazing. We had some amazing looking games. Super Monkey Ball looked also good, and it was just a very out there experience. That's a kind of game we hadn't really seen anything of before. So
GameCube was interesting because this was the last time, GameCube was home to many firsts and many lasts for Nintendo. It's quite interesting.
They have a feature about that related to that.
It should be out by now if you're watching this. If you're watching live stream, it's not out yet. Don't worry. But anyway, the GameCube was like the last console Nintendo really made a powerful system. They actually wanted to compete with PS2 and Xbox. It was more powerful than the PS2, but not as powerful as the Xbox. The Xbox, of course, was Microsoft saying, "Look at how powerful we can make our system. We got DirectX. It's the Xbox. Get it?" But yeah, the games on the GameCube just looked amazing. I mean, Metroid Prime didn't come out at launch; it came out a year later. But that game still looks good to this day. Prime 1 and Prime 2. So there's a couple of other examples as well. Wind Waker has a really great art style too. There's so many. I mean, like you said, Rogue Squadron looked amazing on it too. A lot of these were 60 FPS games too, which granted 60 FPS was easier to run back then because you weren't dealing with HD textures or anything. But yeah, GameCube was kind of like an anomaly in Nintendo's console releases because it was really the last console to really compete hardware-wise with the competition.
That's a good point. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Well, that's a good point with Nintendo going to blue ocean strategy with the Wii and realizing we don't have to. We don't have to compete this way, but necessarily we can't compete this way. Otherwise, maybe we won't necessarily survive. So
did they realize it, or did they realize it?
Okay, that was good. That was a good one.
Joey's not walking away. Good job, Andre.
Amazing. Sorry, Joe, you were gonna say?
It was. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Thanks.
That's
Andre.
what I do. Yep.
That's what you do. But it was just the people always criticize Nintendo for not being for not having consoles that are as powerful as the competition. But the one time they did, it didn't pan out sales wise.
Right.
So it's kind of just really kind of did the right thing with the Wii.
That actually is a really good point. It's important to contextualize Nintendo and the GameCube when it came out, because the GameCube followed a series of Nintendo platforms that, with each generation, were increasingly selling less and less. That was less obvious with the Super Nintendo, but it still did really well and had stiff competition in the form of the Genesis, at least outside of Japan. But especially with the 64, the Nintendo's portion of the market share started to drop significantly, and with the GameCube, they of course wanted to reverse that, and that's partially why, as you were touching on, it is powerful. They designed it. They explicitly had said around that era that they were designing it to make it easy for third-party developers to make games, and it seems like they did succeed in that mission. The problem is that even with its really impressive hardware and its low price point of only $200, which was I think $100 less than the competition in both the PS2 and Xbox, if I remember correctly, it still wasn't able to get a foothold, a huge foothold in the market. And not only that, Nintendo's foothold shrank more so. I think it sold maybe a little under half of what or a little over half of what the N64 did. But compared to the PS2, it bombed. So the GameCube, over its lifespan, sold 22 million units. The PlayStation 2, over its lifespan, sold 158 million. Now, to be fair, it's not fully a fair comparison because it cut off support for the GameCube far before they did for the PS2, but that's because people stopped buying the GameCube, whereas people kept buying the PS2 perpetually.
Also, PS2 is just that's way too
demolished.
You compare anything, you can't compare anything to the PS2.
You can't.
The PS2 will win every time.
So why is that? Why did the PS2 what helped it succeed, and where did Nintendo falter with the GameCube? Why weren't they able to reverse course and start reclaiming market share and instead continue to lose it?
I got 3 words for you on why the PS2 won over the GameCube.
3 words or 3 letters?
DVDs.
I was wondering, that was a big one.
That's it. That is it. That was. I don't think that is only it, but that was a huge part of it. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. They were. Yeah, it was a DVD player, and as part of that, so not only could it play movies, and not only was it a cheap DVD player, it doubled as a game player. I say doubled. I don't know whether you would consider it a DVD player first or a game player first, but that's really the point. It played everything, and that's what really helped it, I think, at that point, because even though it was more expensive than the GameCube, it could do far more, and it came came at the perfect time. DVDs were really just starting to get a foothold in the marketplace as well, and a lot of people were looking to upgrade, from VHS, and it was just kind of the perfect storm. And with having the support of the PlayStation brand already behind it, which itself was the original PlayStation could play CDs as well, and then with having DVDs as well, it was a super cheap medium, again, like the PlayStation, to create games on. Whereas GameCube did go to discs itself, but of course Nintendo used it for their proprietary format again, which I imagine is probably more expensive than the PlayStation format, even if it was, much cheaper than the cartridges they were with before. So, and also that's not even to mention the year head start they had in everyone else too. So they had the momentum behind them as well to just get developers early and keep them,
Yeah, and also, I think it was a bit later, but maybe 3 syllables, Kojima. That didn't help with the Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer later, how great that looked.
But we got
to draw people. I know, that was interesting though. We got Twin Snakes later, which was like a Metal Gear Solid 1.5.
Right.
But shortly after, there was Metal Gear Solid 3 on PlayStation 2. So, kind of neat trade-off.
Speaking of threes, Declan in the chat, our Patreon chat, brings up a great point. I thought those 3 letters were going to be GTA. Exactly.
That's a recent one, too. Yeah, that was another huge one that powered PlayStation 2 along.
Yeah, I don't think we can understate how big GTA 3 was. And they had 3 of them on the platform, all of which were monster games. And that was actually really one of the first examples of like an open world game, and especially in the console space. And that's in effect we're still feeling to this day, where it took Zelda 15 years to finally do it themselves. Even though we saw them kind of like dip their toes in elements of it before, like with having it's actually a pseudo open world in Wind Waker, and to an extent Twilight Princess as well. But yeah, like it was hard to compete against a Sony juggernaut back in those days. And of course, Nintendo's decisions didn't help them at all.
Well, now we got GTA on Switch.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I think it's gone full circle. Unfortunately, arguably a worse version of GTA.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, every console got those terrible versions, but whatever.
Yeah, that's true. So the Nintendo GameCube continued to be, you could almost say, a fan-focused system first, because they had to. Like they really were kind of stuck in appealing to what was a shrinking demographic. They had to hold on to what they had. But through it all, we got some amazing, amazing games, which I think almost benefit through the power of hindsight. Like now that we were divorced from the whole online craze with Xbox Live going, becoming a thing, then PlayStation 2 having online, something GameCube barely dabbled in besides like Phantasy Star Online. I think the games really hold up super well these days, which I think something you touched on, Joey, a little bit is like with Metroid Prime, how that still looks good. I would say by and large, the GameCube library still looks good. Like obviously dated, but like you scale those up and they still look pleasing to the eye, as we saw in like 3D All-Stars with Mario Sunshine. And we just had some like really fun games from Nintendo, whether it was Metroid Prime 1 and 2, Mario Sunshine, which is something I think has aged better now than I think it did at the time. I'm trying to think of what else. There's so many games on the GameCube. Waver's Blue Storm. Yeah, Waver's Blue Storm, exactly.
F-Zero GX.
GX, yes. Unfortunately, the end of the F-Zero series, effectively.
Yeah. And the Wave Race series.
Yeah, so disappointing.
Star Fox Adventures, that still looks great.
And amazing looking game.
Aged a little bit there.
You just played that recently, right? You just popped that in. What was your direct message to me?
I said Star Fox Adventures sucks.
You did. I want a retro review from Tom for Star Fox Adventures 20th anniversary.
That's next year. Make it happen, Tom.
It's like a beautiful coat of paint on a crooked house.
And actually, speaking of this was another one for your video, Joey, that hasn't technically been finished by the time we're recording this. The end of Rare on Nintendo. We only got one GameCube game from them before they moved over to the Xbox, being Star Fox Adventures. So
Star Fox Adventures. But then we got a better Star Fox game after that from Namco, I think was. Did they do Star Fox Assault? Yeah.
I think you're right.
It looks better than Star Fox Zero somehow.
And on the note of Rare, I remember having an interview with a Nintendo employee, and it's like, I think we asked, how's the relationship with Rare? And they said, it's business as usual. So if you ever hear that, it's a bad sign.
That was right before the announcement came that they were...
Yeah, it's like, why is there only one game here? Like, what happened to the 4 games last year? It's like, it's business as usual.
Not a good sign. Yeah, but and then speaking of good-looking games, I have to shout out again Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader, which blew my mind. I remember when they showed off one of the initial cutscenes where you see just the X-Wings flying by, and I'm like, that looks better than the Star Wars Special Editions. Like, it looks so good. And it still looks impressive to this day. I think the first one actually holds up better than the second one, or I should say, you know, the second sequel on GameCube, because that's when they started to do the on foot stuff, and that's where the drawbacks start becoming more apparent. But yeah, still a great looking game to this day, I think. But yeah, so do we have, I guess, what are some of your favorite games from the GameCube? Like, what stands out in your memory as being a highlight of the system?
Well, of course, you know, big Metroid fan over here.
Are you? What? What?
No, believe it or not.
Never knew.
Never knew, right?
Never knew.
But I keep thinking about Wind Waker for some reason during this discussion. Wind Waker wasn't really my introduction to Zelda. I actually played Wind Waker after I played Twilight Princess, which is quite odd to think about, right? Like,
I think it might be better that way.
Yeah, it might be, actually. I played Twilight Princess first, and then I was like, hey, I need to play Wind Waker. So I bought Wind Waker, played it on my Wii via backwards compatibility. It's such a great feature on that system. Remember backwards compatibility?
Yeah, it's good times.
So good. Yeah. And that game was just a massive experience. Like you said, it's an open world game. It really is. Like, it's a very simplified open world, made better through the HD version with the Swift Sail.
Yep. Heck yeah.
Wii U. But that was just an epic experience, and my only regret is I didn't play Wind Waker sooner.
Wow, yeah, it's a good regret.
Yep. There's many games I regret not getting on GameCube. I traded in my copy of Thousand Year Door. That
Dear
is my number one.
God, you'd be a millionaire if you had kept that copy.
If only.
Yep.
If only.
I'll say I had a bit different experience of Wind Waker, because coming off Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Wind Waker felt a little bit shallow despite the deep seas. For me, like, it looked great, but it felt like it kind of petered off towards the end.
It did.
Probably something about just really wishing there was more to do on the open ocean. Maybe I should really look back at it sometime and see if my views changed, but Nintendo tried a lot of experiments during that era, and sometimes it's like, just do the same thing that I love. Like, I was less open-minded back then, maybe. But out of that, we did get Double Dash,
yes,
which was like one of my all-time favorites that I played well over a decade after and still do. So that was maybe made all that experimenting worthwhile.
Yeah, every time Tom and I meet up, we do multiple all cups in Double Dash in co-op mode, where one of us is gunning, the other driving, and it's so fun. Partially because we often have to unlock it because we can never keep track of our memory cards, and we always lose our save files. Which, by the way, I should mention, those memory cards were really annoying on the GameCube. They had like a super small amount of memory, and that was frustrating. But yeah, I guess for me, I think Double Dash is obviously a highlight. I would say Animal Crossing, though. This is also where Animal Crossing got its start. Technically got its start on 64 in Japan, but they ported that to the GameCube with some enhancements, and I remember being really impressed by that game. Like, it was such a neat, novel idea where, you know, now ongoing games are a concept we're all familiar with. You know, whether it's games like Fortnite or, you know, simulation type, or, you know, any number of types of games, online games that just have like that are constantly adding stuff and changing things. But Animal Crossing was one of the first games to really do this, and it did so with everything already on the cart or the CD itself or DVD, whatever the GameCube's discs were. And it was just a really neat idea how the game changed in real time, but depending on what day it was, what time it was, things would unlock, different characters would say things. It felt like a real living community on your system, and that was such a neat idea. And they even incorporated like almost an early version of Nintendo's Online, if you will, or they gave the impression that they're being on online with how well it worked with the multiplayer experience. Because what it would do was, if I remember correctly, if you took a friend's memory card, had them plug it into your system, you could, of course, I forget how exactly it worked, but you could like visit their town, for instance, but then it would save data to both of them, and then things would change in real time. Like, you'd have a villager like several days later move out of your town, and then they pop up on your friend's system like a week later. It's like, how did that happen without the internet? Or you could go to Tom Nook and you could send a friend a package. You could actually send them an item by giving Tom Nook a gift, and then he'll give you a passcode. You give that passcode to a friend, they'll type it in, and they get the gift that you've sent them. It was such a neat idea. So they did a lot of cool like experimentation with the game that, wouldn't become commonplace and easier until Nintendo added proper online, years later. And then, of course, there's Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, which is an amazing evolution of a series that started on 64 and arguably the end of that same series, some would say. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of great games. And then Smash Brothers, which was just a ton of fun.
Yep.
How can we forget? I mean, that game's still living to this day.
Yeah.
Can't kill it.
You can't kill it. No matter what, you just can't. And that's another game I played much, much later into the system's life. I think the Wii was out by the time I played it because I was like, oh, they're coming out with a new Smash Bros. Game. Guess I got to catch up by playing Melee. So, yeah, Melee was when I fell in love with the series. Like, I was just like, wow, this is so fun. The control scheme is just perfect, and everything about this game is just perfect. It was just it's the only real fighting game, like, not just Melee, but Smash Bros. In general. It's the only real fighting game that I play to this day. Like, actual, whether it's a fighting game or not, like, that's up for debate, but it's a fighting game. There's no debate.
Yeah, I did like Melee better than Brawl, and that was one of the party games we played a whole lot back in the day. It just looked gorgeous back in the GameCube era, and it was smart of them not to release it right at launch, because then everyone would probably just buy that and none of the other games.
But yeah, it came just a couple weeks later. That's right. That was a kind of fun little thing. We had two first-party Nintendos at launch, I believe, with Luigi's Mansion and Wave Race, which is already a decent amount. And then they added, we had Smash Brothers shortly thereafter, and then Pikmin, I believe, not long after that. Or around, they may have even been the same day, Smash and Pikmin. I don't quite remember. But yeah, like that first holiday season was amazing for the GameCube, if you were a Nintendo fan at the least. But I'm seeing the chat mention a bunch of other games too. Sunny M2 mentions Mario Strikers, which, yes, Mario Strikers was fantastic. Not launched. Most of these games weren't launched. But yeah, that was such a fun game from Next Level Games, which Nintendo now owns, just as of this past year. And we need a proper update to that game. So please give it. Yeah, there it is.
Before Strikers, Soccer Slam, Sega Soccer Slam. That was a great one.
That was a precursor. That's right. To that was made by Next Level Games as well. Right?
I think it was made by Black Box Games at times, but I think some of them went on to Next Level Games.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I'm confusing it with. Right. I think it's the same developers were involved at least, or some of the same members. And then actually that's where like the Mario GameCube games, the Mario sports games really came into their own on GameCube with Mario Power Tennis and Mario, whatever the Mario Golf was, I forget, Toadstool Tour.
Yeah.
And we also got Mario Baseball, which is amazing. Then we have Sunny M2 mentioning some of the more experimental games like Donkey Konga and Jungle Beat, and then Odama being a pinball game, a pinball like not platforming. What do you remember? Do you remember that time?
It's like a pinball war simulation game, like a pinball RTS.
Yep.
Let's not forget Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix.
Heck yes! A classic. Waluigi has some amazing dance moves in that game, by the way. I think he's actually the main villain of the game or something, so...
No, do my boy dirty again.
Then someone else had mentioned, trying to remember, actually no, I think that covers up most of the game so far. Oh, no, here we go. Eric mentions Beautiful Joe and Killer 7. We had the Capcom 5?
Capcom 5, but one of them was canceled, I believe.
The Capcom 4, Capcom 4, yeah, that was pretty amazing. And I remember at one point with Resident Evil 4 being announced and going through multiple reboots on the series on the platform, the creator of the game, do you remember his name?
Shinji Mikami?
Thank you. Yeah. He mentioned that he would cut off his head if the game ever came to PlayStation 2. And then it did come to PlayStation 2 like a year later. He still has his head, thankfully.
Still waiting. Do it. Yeah, that's crazy. That RE4, that's just a huge game because it's still getting released to this day. And I see why. It's really good. It really was the perfect balance of horror and action that the series has struggled to keep balanced until maybe RE7 and RE8. But yeah.
It took them a long time to get back to that, like a formula that works after it too. Like, it was surprising. To me, that's one of the reasons why as well RE4 stands out so well, because they faltered with 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh yeah, has not reached that level of perfection since.
Yeah, that is true.
Declan says RE4 is in microwaves now.
You can play. Can you play it on your fridge? Is it like Doom now?
Yeah, RE4 ended up being everywhere. That is hilarious how it went from being like the Nintendo exclusive to literally being on every freaking platform. Even in VR now. And you should play it, except Wii U. Poor Wii U. So sad. Although you could play at least the Wii version on Wii U. So
okay, it counts. It counts. It counts, but yeah. And Kirby Air Ride. Let's not forget about Kirby Air Ride, which is not a game that I've owned, but I've played it a lot with friends, and I regret not buying it because, yeah, it's a fun game, and there hasn't been one like it, and we're still asking Nintendo for a sequel. But hey, it took them 20 years to give us Pokemon Snap 2.
That's true.
New Pokemon Snap, so there's hope.
Kirby Air Ride is arguably the first 3D Kirby, and as we wait now for the first proper platforming Kirby, with Kirby and the Forgotten City, I believe. I'll say in two
Land,
thank you, Forgotten Land. That's right.
Yeah.
Kirby Air Ride is fantastic. Also, you made use of the LAN adapter along with Mario Kart Double Dash and 1080 snowboarding Avalanche. Was it Avalanche?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Avalanche.
where you can sync together multiple platforms or multiple GameCubes, have your own screen. You're bringing more players. In the case of Double Dash, you got 16 players at once. I love that. That was so fun. Tom and I think we did the LAN multiple times for Double Dash, both at our houses and at tournaments. Yeah,
it was a great feature to add in, although a super novelty type item, but it worked really well. You had to wait a little bit for it to sync, but once it did, it was rock solid.
Yeah. Unlike Nintendo's current online.
We're getting a lot of good comments about things that I didn't even think about until now, like the GBA Link.
Yes,
that was revolutionary.
It was. Tom and I played that at E3 before it came out. Yeah, being Four Swords Adventure back when they used the 16-bit version of Link before they changed it to the Toon Link version. Yeah, that was so cool. How you could see like Link on the TV, then you could go into a house and you'd be on your little Game Boy screen. So you're playing like your own little separate version, separate from the main game on the TV. And it was kind of like a precursor to the Wii U, actually, which would try to build on that concept more, although in some ways they didn't go as far as Nintendo did with the GBA,
no.
I think.
No, they did not. Like, you can get a Metroid Fusion suit and Metroid Prime by linking them together.
That's right.
That was so cool. And the Wavebird controller, man.
Oh, Wavebird was... I think they were the first ones to popularize the wireless controllers officially. And that thing was amazing. It was wireless. It worked through walls. I remember doing tests with it where I took it outside and took it across a bridge that was behind my house, and it still worked perfectly. And the batteries would last forever in that thing. You could go dozens and dozens of hours without having to change them, and it worked great.
Man, oh man. Like, I would love to get a Wavebird. It's just like, I don't trust sellers, and I know it's expensive, but what's more important is the sellers, and I don't know if I trust a used Wavebird right now.
Yeah, they're not... I had to buy a couple. They're not quite as good quality as the ones I had originally, but they're still pretty good from time to time.
We really do need to touch just a little bit more on the controller in general, whether it's a wired one or the Wavebird wireless version, because it still stands to me, and I know for many, like to be one of their most favorite controllers, because it's just comfortable. Now, it's not perfect. It has a small D-pad. Some of the buttons are a little bit weird, especially the Z button, and it doesn't have enough buttons. It didn't have the clickable sticks, and it's missing even more buttons beyond that compared to the Xbox and PlayStation 2. But for the first party games that were designed around it, it worked so well. It just felt good. It was comfortable. The shoulder buttons were amazing with the clickable button inside, and then even I still like the face buttons arrangement where you have the giant A button with the 3 buttons circling it, making it easy to press them while also pressing A at the same time, which games like I think Extreme G used really well, where you could use gas and then easily use your primary weapon or your sub weapon, and it was just really, I think, kind of really neat controller that we haven't quite seen replicated since, except by Nintendo themselves, but they still re-release it to this day.
Yeah, I'm glad they still re-release it to this day. That controller is just great, and like you said, it's not perfect. Like, those buttons are just weird. The C-stick, the C-stick sucks. It's not great at all. But the controller is comfortable.
It is funny because even Nintendo, like when they're being dragged into the future, with the second analog stick, they still have to do their own weird thing, call it a C-stick for a camera stick, and like the C buttons on the 64 before it, and make it so that it was primarily meant to be used for camera control. But this is when you had games like, of course, Halo coming out, and like, nope, we're using the second stick for everything, like, we're making two control stick handling a major point of our console, and Nintendo was caught a little bit flat-footed with it. You can still use it, like games like Time Splitters, of course, use the C-stick for that purpose as well, but it wasn't ideal for using as a primary input, because, it had like a little nub as opposed to a full, like, analog shell. I don't know why they did it that way. I guess just to avoid confusion, but...
I'm not sure either, but I know the Metroid Prime games were like, hey, you change your guns with this. Okay.
Great example. Like Metroid Prime, they could have used a Halo-like control scheme, but they didn't. They purposely stuck with like using the controller as it was seemingly intended. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. Yeah, you had to basically design the game for it. It worked great, but unfortunately, when you're importing third-party games to it, sometimes it didn't turn out so well if they didn't spend time to like really tailor it to the GameCube experience.
Right. So while we're talking about, I guess, kind of the hardware or the system in general, like what are some pros or cons you have about the system? Like looking back, are there any other elements you remember thinking of fondly, or things you think were like, no, that was a mistake, or they could have done that better?
Well, I feel like, of course, the decision to make the discs that way was probably part of the reason why the system didn't do that well. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm kind of just like blinded by nostalgia here. I really just feel like, but I know I wasn't also around for like the software gaps because I was just a child who couldn't buy games all the time. So those weren't really a problem for me. Yeah, I can't really think of anything. Like, we talk about the imperfections of the system, but that's part of the system's charm now, because like we can complain about the C stick all we want, but if I would go back in time and change it, I don't think I would. You know,
made it unique.
Yeah, exactly. It made it unique. And I don't know, maybe they should have launched with Mario game. I'm not sure. It's so tough to really like think about what they could have done right, because I'm like, I wouldn't change anything.
I mean, yeah, it's always hard to imagine a future different than what we ended up getting, but I do think launching with Mario might have helped. Luigi's Mansion was a weird game. One that I very much enjoyed, but it's not the killer app that they arguably needed, I think. And that maybe is the biggest mark against the GameCube's launch lineup, is even though it had a ton of great games, including more following shortly thereafter with Smash and Pikmin, it didn't have like that one singular killer app. I think the closest they actually had was in the form of Star Wars Rogue Leader. That's probably the closest they had to a proper killer app at launch, but it wasn't first party, and I think the lack of Mario did hurt them at that point.
How about this for Mario? They were secretive about Mario Sunshine because they're worried about someone stealing the water backpack mechanic.
No one stole it.
If they just showed it off, they would have had the promise of Mario in the future, and that would have helped push GameCubes.
And it's really interesting to look back now, because that's something they actually fixed with the Wii, where even though Mario also wasn't a launch title on the Wii with Mario Galaxy, they did show it off during the Wii's proper reveal, where we saw Mario Galaxy shown in their like little teaser, or not teaser trailer, like what's
Sizzle reel?
Rizzle reel, yeah, sizzle reel, thank you. And Rizzle reel. Yeah, in their sizzle reel. And it looked awesome. It's like, whoa, was that Mario? That looks so cool. What? And that's all they needed. And if they had done that for Mario Sunshine, that probably would have helped a little bit. I don't think it would have been enough to turn the tide. I think GameCube had the stacked against it from day one, but at the same time, I appreciate it for what it is still. You know, I still like the system. But for me, I think one of the biggest weaknesses myself was the lack of online, especially compared to the Xbox at the time. That's a big reason why I think during that era, I did gravitate toward Xbox a lot of the time, is because it was doing online. It was doing it really well. Halo 2 online was amazing. Splinter Cell was so fun teaming up and seeing how teamwork could work, and it made me really miss, like, you know, not having that in Mario Kart Double Dash, for instance. If Double Dash were online, I don't think I would ever put that game away. It would just be permanently in my GameCube. And then games like Crimson Skies showed how you can make like a flight type game like Star Fox, but have that work in an online environment against other players. So, and that's something I really wish Nintendo would start experimenting with far sooner than they eventually would do on the Nintendo DS. So that's something that they kind of missed. Even though they had the accessories for it, they had the broadband adapter, which they only used for the LAN games and then Phantasy Star Online, you know?
That's true. Declan mentioned this was an era where Nintendo rushed out games due to dwindling sales. Can you imagine a version of Wind Waker and Sunshine that weren't rushed?
Great point.
And that's news to me. I didn't know they were rushed, but I'm also not very surprised.
Yeah, so Mario Sunshine definitely is a little buggier and a little bit less refined than most of Nintendo's first-party games, especially Mario, and that did stand out then. But then you had games like Wind Waker, which were actually pretty polished. But it did seem to lack. You know, they cut out some dungeons, which we would find out later for sure. There were, I think, a couple of dungeons planned that they had cut out, and I think were later reused in Twilight Princess. But then you also had parts of the game that just padded it out. Of course, you could argue sailing felt like padding, but then you had the stupid Triforce quest, which really just brought the gameplay to a halt. And in hindsight, you didn't even need it, as Wind Waker HD would later prove, where they really cut that quest down. The game is better for it, you know? And I don't know why they felt the need to elongate the gameplay artificially when it didn't need it, so... And I guess real quick, we have to touch on, you probably don't remember this, Joey, but when they revealed Wind Waker, back before it was known as Wind Waker, when they just showed off Zelda on the GameCube, when they first revealed the art style, people lost their minds. I might have been one of them. I don't fully remember, but I do remember like when Link winked at the camera, I'm like, what? That's a little different.
His head was huge. I think it was bigger in the initial reveal trailer, too.
Yeah, this really cartoony art style. You had this cloud, these, smoke clouds, and then this cartoonish Link with, really new art, weird looking, like, chibi-like art style. And it was bizarre seeing Link in that form. And it was one that a lot of people would eventually come to love, but I don't think that did Nintendo any favors at that time, because people were already making fun of the GameCube for being, look, it's a lunchbox, it's purple, it's has a handle on it, and then now you add this cartoonish looking version of Zelda, which people had started to look at as being one of Nintendo's more mature franchises, and it did seem like Nintendo's almost like actively targeting a younger demographic, even if that obviously wasn't the case. Wind Waker, in some ways, is one of the darkest Zeldas we've had, especially with how they take out Ganon, Ganondorf in that version, right?
Some would say it's also like the best Zelda game.
Yeah, some would.
To this day.
Absolutely. So it just kind of goes to show just how different the era was during it, for the GameCube. So
nowadays, it's like if you even suggest, like I do on Twitter too often, like, oh, maybe they should do a little more realistic Zelda. Now you'll get hissed at by Nintendo fans.
Actual hissing.
Yeah, actual hissing.
Declan says, funny how everyone hated Wind Waker's look, but it's aged better graphically than even Skyward Sword. 100%. It aged better than Twilight Princess, it aged better than Skyward Sword. Some might even say it's aged better than the Breath of the Wild visually. It's an art style that looks really good.
Yeah, it does look really good, but I do think Zelda games moving forward, I don't know. I think Wind Waker could only do that kind of art style. I don't think Nintendo could really go back to it. But if they do, some would say, Breath of the Wild is sort of a modification of that Wind Waker art style. So as long as they just keep experimenting with Zelda art styles, that's what I'd like to see from Nintendo. I honestly don't want every Zelda game to look like Breath of the Wild moving forward. I want them to keep experimenting with styles, even Link's Awakening's style. It's divisive, I know, but yeah, stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's always great when they try new things, and if not, we just get stuck in a rut, and it'll eventually become boring to all of us. I mean, that's what's great about Nintendo. They're willing to take risks like that, and sometimes they don't pay off, sometimes they do.
Yeah, I mean, look at Pikmin itself, which was effectively a launch title on the GameCube, a very different looking one. It was basically Nintendo's take on RTS games, and that game was kind of like a hard sell. I feel like from day one. And as we've seen throughout the series history now, it's continually been seemingly like a bit of a hard sell, which might be why we still haven't seen Pikmin 4, but with Pikmin Bloom recently coming to mobile, maybe there's a chance we'll finally get that fourth one. But yeah, it just shows Nintendo taking risks, trying a genre of game that they had really no experience in. And it worked. Pikmin was great. It was really fun and unique and different, and it's really kind of representative of Nintendo during that whole era, so...
Oh yeah, GameCube was great. I love the GameCube.
And in fact, Nintendo even went out of its way to kind of show that as being what they're about. Tom, you were the E3 meta that we discussed earlier. Their motto then was the Nintendo difference, where they showed off other consoles. Look, all they're doing is making better looking games, of games you've already seen before. But here we are making these weird, these weird quirky games, and that's the Nintendo difference. We focus on quality here at Nintendo, not just remaking the same stuff over and over. And whether that's a fair complaint or not, I'm not here to say. But Nintendo did try to really carve out its own niche. And you could say they did. It's just a very small niche that they carved out for themselves then.
Yeah. That's one of the problems with less games. You have better titles, but if they don't do well, then you really suffer. And if your console isn't selling enough units to support them, well, then you kind of have to move on and end the system's life quicker than expected. So
to kind of bring it back full circle, it really is interesting, as we were touched on earlier, to kind of see how GameCube is contextualized by history now, where they did try and make a powerful, easy system to lure developers. It didn't really work compared to PS2, and you can see now how that entire platform then led to the Wii, where Nintendo they realized, well, having hardware parity with our competitors didn't help. Even having a cheaper system didn't help. We need to do something different. And that's what led to the Blue Ocean strategy. And of course, with the Wii having motion controls and having a remote style controller to help appeal and broaden its demographic with easy-to-play games like Wii Sports. But I think it's really interesting is that there were elements of the Wii and even more recent systems that were apparently planned for the GameCube originally. So the motion controls actually began on the GameCube. They were prototyped on the system, and they had planned to be there, I think, at launch before Nintendo abandoned the idea and brought it back for the Wii. To the point where Sega of America, which remember, they still were in the hardware business then, Sega of America's VP has a quote saying, "What does worry me is Dolphins," which is the GameCube's prototype name, "what worries me is Dolphins sensory controllers, which are rumored to include microphones and other things because there's an example of someone thinking about something different." And that goes to show how Nintendo was already thinking differently then. Competitors were afraid of them thinking differently. And even if that control didn't fully come to pass then, you can see how it kind of led to what we did get on the Wii. And then apparently there was another finding too, where the GameCube was planned to have a portable screen as well. So in a sense, it was almost an early version of the Switch as well, where it could, at one point it may have come with its own portable screen where you just plug it in and play GameCube games on the go. So
I know they released a portable screen. I don't know if it was Nintendo.
Did.
Yeah, third parties did that. That's what I thought. But I remember that screen being very hot. Like that's what I remember. Like friends having was that portable screen, and it looked so cool. It was teeny and tiny. You had to sit right up to it, but it was still cool.
The quality of the image itself wasn't the best, but it was amazing to be able to play. I saw the same screens too, and being able to see console quality graphics on the go was amazing at that time. Because otherwise we're playing Game Boy Advance, and as cool as games looked, it wasn't F-Zero compared to two F-Zeros. It's not the same. So, I guess to kind of to that point real quick, if you were Nintendo looking back 20 years ago, what would you have done different? What would you have done different with the GameCube to make it more competitive and not befall the same fate that it did with its that I ended up doing rather?
Show the Mario game. Don't even release it. Just show it.
As much as the mini DVDs were also for faster loading times, just use a regular DVD and keep third-party costs down for developers. Maybe even, despite it sounding bad, how much we love the GameCube controller, maybe even have a secondary controller that just had all the buttons and stuff that matched it, so it'd be easier for third parties to port to the system.
Right. I think, maybe just better standardizing their stuff. I think it may have come at the expense of the GameCube we know and love, but in terms of market share, I think just being closer to the competitors might have helped them in that case. Having a proper DVD drive with movie support, that probably would have helped. That would have at least help stop the bleeding against the PlayStation, I think. At least make them
GameCube would be a lot bigger, but yeah.
And
yes, it would have
people are probably going to say about it, like, they kind of dabbled in that. I think there's a Panasonic Q
That's
or whatever
right.
that it's the most stylish GameCube out there. If you ever take a look for it, it's kind of like a chrome finish, and that could play DVDs. Like they were saying, like we can license out the GameCube technology to other developers, and I guess they were close with Panasonic. So
yeah, it had a really cool look to it, but I think only released in Japan, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yes.
And I think it was also substantially more expensive. But even the Xbox didn't have DVD out of the box too. You had to buy an accessory to play DVDs on the Xbox. So Sony really had that whole DVD thing on lockdown, and that really worked to their benefit. So yeah, having a DVD player, having maybe more normal controller, having Mario at launch, would that have been enough, you think?
Put Halo on it.
There we go.
Advertise the theoretical millions of polygons it can do, and not the actual millions of polygons it can do. I think that confused people all the time.
I remember those days. That's right. Here's what our system could theoretically do that we would never actually use in game because they're ugly, unshaded polygons. So, you want every game to look like Red Alarm or Virtual Boy? No, you don't. I think something else that would have helped actually is keeping Rare. I think they should have kept Rare. It's so easy to look back and like, they made the right decision because Rare didn't work out for Microsoft and the games weren't all that amazing. Some of them actually were. But I think had they kept Rare, that would have helped a lot. That they had more mature games, which is something Nintendo kind of needed. It will help fill the gaps in their schedule because they lost a major partner in that. And it would have made it so Xbox was less competitive by having, what would have been Xbox games on Nintendo. So...
Yep. Rare... We saw in N64, though, having Rare didn't mean you win, but it does mean you do a lot better with a lot more games available. Like, I'd love a world where we got Donkey Kong racing.
Yep.
We don't live in that universe, so I constantly try to travel between worlds.
we need our like a Doctor Strange or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Doctor Strange, right?
Eric Flapjack actually says EA also had a good relationship with Nintendo at this point. They put Mario characters in games like NBA Street and SSX to make up for the GameCube versions not having online. A fun story about that. My friend worked at EA as a game tester around that era, and there was one room where there was like no internet, locked doors, nobody could easily get in and out. And he's like, "What's that? What's that room? Do they have next generation systems in there?" And it turned out to be the room where they're adding like Mario characters to those games. How much lockdown they had for it.
Wow, that's kind of amazing. The GameCube's just a fun system to look back on. I don't know.
And it really is. Like, it was a very experimental time for Nintendo too, as you'll come to find out in my feature, which is probably out by now. But they just did a lot of different things. Like Wind Waker was still a very different Zelda game. With not just with its art style, but with its with the way the world was designed. It was all ocean. Like there was maybe 80% land in that game or something.
20% land.
I mean 20% land. Thank you. The world was 80% water. And even like a first-person Metroid game, like you're crazy, Nintendo.
Yeah, everyone thought it. Like there was a Penny Arcade comic where they're like, "Here, let's make Metris. Let's like Metroid Tetris. Like, why not?"
Oh my god, I want Metroid Tetris now.
No, so do I. They made pinball. Give us Tetris, or tennis. Metroid Tetris would be great too. But hey, Tetris 99 already came out with that. But then Double Dash, very experimental. Nintendo's never done anything like that since. I could go on the lists. Dance Dance Revolution, Mario Mix.
You know what? I think what was fun about the GameCube era was that, I mean, we keep saying it's experimental, and that's partially because this was only the second generation of 3D. Nintendo is still kind of figuring things out, you know? Like, what is a 3D Mario? We saw Mario 64, but what's a sequel to that look like? And we get this kind of weird backpack one, with, a water backpack one in Mario Sunshine. And it was kind of fun to see them like try to reestablish their franchises in a 3D environment, where in many cases they were pretty refined, or they were even more refined than the 64 versions, but they were still trying new stuff there. And that's something that we've arguably seen less of over the years, where now that there's a template, like the games tend to look the same. Like look at Splatoon 2 to Splatoon 1. It's basically the same game. And that's not always the case. I'm not meaning to, and that's not necessarily even always a bad thing. But even games like Mario Kart, which felt kind of, fairly established, there were multiple up to that point, still felt very different on the GameCube, and in some ways feel even more different now looking back than they did even at the time of release, which is impressive, So it was just a fun system that I think really benefits from the test of time, and it holds up well. Whereas the games that I loved playing back in the day on Xbox haven't held up as well, because you can't play them online really anymore, except for Halo 2 through the Master Chief Collection. So. All right, go ahead.
Real quick too, N64 games, they could like barely run 3D, really, like how little power it was. While GameCube was a huge step up in terms of graphics fidelity, and like really until recently, it looked really good. Like, even some still look good. I mean, Soul Calibur 2 looked amazing for years. I imported that game because it wasn't coming out until like September. So I could play it all summer long with my friends. I think it ended up costing $160. Well worth it still looking back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was a monumental step up visually from the GameCube, from the 64. It looked so good. I just think Nintendo's biggest problem really was that they were kind of pigeonholed into this being like kiddie-like platform, and people were kind of hungry for something new. People who grew up with NES, Super NES, they wanted something a little bit more mature and different, and that's why I think partially why the PS2 really took off by comparison. So
interesting stuff. Like how most people thought back then was, we don't want that kid stuff anymore. We want like guns and blood and stuff, right? And then, but nowadays we're like, oh, that's kind of overplayed now.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Now Nintendo's stuff is like, it feels relatively, feels quite fresh by comparison, to the point where they almost effectively had their own Game Awards category, being the best family game, and they just dominated the nominees this year. So.
Oh yeah, and we got to bring up, before we even close this discussion, I know people are going to get mad at us for not mentioning Eternal Darkness.
Right, yeah. Tom, you were just playing it, weren't you?
Yeah, I was playing that today to get a bit of a refresher to see how it feels. Graphically, not as great, but was coming off, I think, from N64, bringing it to it, although they improved the graphics. But the sound is amazing in that, and just really still unsettling, and the insanity effects, really ambitious to have play so many different playable characters throughout it. And that was only one of 2 Silicon Knights games with Nintendo as a second party.
Eternal Darkness, besides Twin Snakes, right?
Yeah.
Eternal Darkness, was a really cool idea, really neat game. I don't know if it holds up. In fact, I think one of the issues with the game is it probably doesn't hold up as well, in a mechanical sense, I guess, because of the sanity effects. Because they did a really good job matching them to the technology at the time, where you'd see your volume control go down your TV, or your TV would change channels or something. Like, these are all fake effects in the game, but those look very different these days. And so plus it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, whereas most TVs are widescreen these days. So they would have to, in order to properly present the game these days, you'd have to properly update it. And I don't know if that's something we'll ever get, even though I think that would be very cool to see. So yeah, that's a rare example of a game that's actively made worse playing it these days than at the time of its release. So, yep. Any final thoughts, anyone, on the GameCube's 20th anniversary? Now that's 20 years old, which still blows my mind. That's been 20 years. Hey, Tom, that's also our 20th anniversary ourselves then. I met you, or almost 20 and a half, I guess. We met at E3 that year.
Yeah.
Weren't you guys teenagers back then still?
We were. 16. I was 16.
Yeah. Now you can't even get into E3 at that age.
I wasn't supposed to get in then either, but they let me in. I got a beer too somewhere, somehow, at E3.
I'm telling them.
Oh no, don't tell them. They'll never let me back in.
Yeah, that was my first time flying anywhere. So.
Wow. Yeah, and by yourself, no less, right? So,
yeah.
So, any final thoughts on the GameCube before we fully wrap it up here? Anything you want to get out, or any final points you want to bring up?
You can't experience this when you play GameCube games on Wii, but the menu was amazing with the little cubes rolling around, and then holding on to see memory card management. I was like, whoa, whoa. Then he kind of transparent cube effects in the menu. It was quite something.
We were robbed of that intro on Wii.
Yeah, it's just a screen and the sound effect. I'm like, what?
It's horrible.
Same.
But you get progressive scan, so.
True. Though you could get that on the GameCube as well if you had the component cables.
Yeah.
Yep. And I didn't know that you had to hold B at the beginning of games, so that was fun to do for the HDMI adapter review.
I remember that. That's right. That was fun. I'm like, this is so different, and I'm like, oh. I think what they do now. Were you playing on Wii or?
No, I was playing on GameCube because I was reviewing the Prism HD adapter, which is a really good adapter. You guys should get it.
That's right. Yeah. I believe, I could be wrong, but I think if you play the games on a Wii, it automatically held B or something for the required game.
I think it did.
Yeah, so it automatically bring up the prompt, which is awesome. Declan says, that startup noise. It was so great. If you held Z on a different amount of controllers as a startup, you'll get different sounds, like squeaky shoes or kids laughing for some reason. It was so bizarre. Maybe I'll do a quick video on that, actually.
That sounds like a video that should be done.
Yes. Maybe I'll do it. I've got time. Tom, any final thoughts?
Something else that's really neat, that's where the Odyssey Galaxy team started off with Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, if you didn't know. And the fur effects in that game were amazing. So and using, who knew Donkey Kong could be a platformer with bongos? Well, apparently they did.
It hurt your hands after a while. Like 2 or 3 stages, I was done. Those bongos were a little painful, beating on them.
One of my brother's friends could do Indian drumming, so he could be like with like both fingers. He got amazing scores in that game.
They actually later re-released that game on Wii, but with motion controls instead, where you're just doing the motion.
It wasn't the same.
It wasn't.
Not the same.
All right. Anything else, everyone? Okay.
Fantastic system. Well, I hope it shows up on Nintendo Switch Online one day, because that's really expensive if you want to get into GameCube games currently.
Yes, and the GameCube controller already works on the system, so make it happen. Sorry, what, Joey?
Yeah, it's just so expensive. I can't buy half these games I'm talking about because they're so expensive. I could, I just shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think there's a ton of people that would, one, want to relive these games, and two, a lot of people that miss these games that would love to play them for the first time. And I think if they added that to the expansion pack, you would see the opinions change real fast on the value of that thing. If they added GameCube support, that'd be amazing. So, Eric says, great discussion, so many memories. Thank you so much, Eric. And that is going to wrap up our discussion for the 20th anniversary of the GameCube in North America. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane as we relived our memories and talk theoreticals of how Nintendo could have done it differently. But again, had they done it differently, we may have ended up with a very different system that maybe wasn't worth reliving 20 years of memories of it. So, anyways, yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do more with the GameCube in the future as Nintendo eventually, hopefully, re-releases these games. But until then, we hope you enjoyed our coverage, and we'll hopefully have more. I think we will have more, in fact, on this anniversary. So stay tuned for more videos about the 20th anniversary very soon if they're not already up on the channel. Thanks for watching, everyone, and stay tuned to GameXplain for more anniversaries in the near future. We'll catch you later. Bye, everyone. I'm just gonna keep waving. That's what I'm doing now, apparently. Just keep waving.